Hello and welcome back to the Sam Beast YouTube channel. My name is David Foxen. Thank you very much for joining us on today's webinar. Now, today we're going to be talking about hardware asset management and how it can be your hero throughout the different life cycle stages. This presentation was actually delivered at the ITAM Review Wisdom EMEA event a few weeks ago. But with their approval, I decided to repurpose it and put it on the YouTube channel so that anyone who couldn't attend or didn't see it can see it and hopefully get some benefits and find it useful. No fancy cameras today, just straight up Teams recording because it's all about the content rather than looking nice. So yeah, really hope you find it useful, and let's dig straight in. So first of all, let's go through who I am. So my name is David Foxen. I'm an ITAM consultant of about 15 years now. Obviously not been a consultant for 15 years, but been in ITAM for 15 years. Can't believe it's been that long. I've never had any other job other than ITAM. There's a fun fact that I like to tell absolutely everyone and anyone that listens. I work with clients on complete green or brownfield ITAM sites where they've not got anything or they've got very little. And then we build up and implement a full IT asset management function or team. Or we can do ITAM maturity assessments, gap analysis, consulting services, support services, even a bit of kind of mentoring services as well. So very lucky to have a broad range of clients and services that we help support at the moment. Speak at ITAM events, have done around the world throughout my career. Founded Sam Beast Consulting, which is just me. But yeah, it's still my company. I'm still very proud of it. Joint ITAM Consultant of the Year 2022, which is a huge honour for me. Big family man and a huge Luton Town Football Club fan. We recently got promoted to the Premier League for the first time in our history, so very excited for that. And as part of the whole Luton thing, I'm also a big Luton Town football shirt collector. Don't ask why. You can probably see some in the background of the picture that I have on there, blurred out. There's some of my framed ones, but I've got hundreds of Luton shirts. So let's dig into the purpose on why we're talking about hardware asset management and how it can be your hero. Now, this is a very high level view of what a hardware life cycle looks like in terms of different stages. These are the key stages that a hardware asset will go through during its life within your organization. Each stage will have its own set of processes, sub-processes, racing matrix, work instructions, or standard operating procedures. So don't think that I've just glossed over a lot of it. I'm just focusing on the high level lifecycle management things. Each stage actually deserves and needs its own real focus. This is not a drag and drop exercise that you can do from organization to organization. Sure, there might be some similarities when you're in the same kind of industry or sector, but on the whole, you do really need to take into account the organization's needs, the organization's wants, and ultimately where they want to end up or be with ITAM throughout that stage. You may have a financial organization that has to have the highest level of maturity, has to have loads of auditable data and processes and fields because they've got regulatory constraints and rules that they must follow. Or you may have a more relaxed organization that just wants to make sure that they're deploying hardware correctly, or that they're following corporate and environmental sustainability when they're retiring and disposing of equipment. That's why it varies between each organization. So I highly recommend you do that kind of analysis to make sure that these life cycle stages fits your organization's needs. Each stage requires updates to your AMDB, your asset management database, and your CMDB, but we'll dive into that more as we go through the presentation. And if you can get all of the life cycle stages nailed for your organization, HAM will be your hero. Hopefully you've started to understand why I've called this presentation Let HAM Be Your Hero. It is based on a very famous song by Enrique Iglesias, and you'll see connotations back to that song and song lyrics in the headings of some of the sections. Yes, it's very cringy. Yes, it's very cheesy, but how else can we make hardware asset management fun and engaging? So would you onboard if I asked you to onboard? You're starting to see the relationship with some of the song lyrics now. I'm sure you've had the case when you've got a user that's seen that Apple, for example, have released a new hardware model. this person then decides they need it for a job because it looks nice and that they want to show off to their friends and colleagues that they've got the latest equipment. Well, hold on. Hold your horses. There's a reason why we have a hardware onboarding process. The first thing you need to consider when you're onboarding hardware is your existing hardware convention. Do you have existing hardware models that might meet the requirements already, that have been fully onboarded and approved within your organization? Is the new model actually worth adding to your existing hardware standards? And if it is, then by all means proceed with the hardware onboarding process. How often do the new hardware models refresh? We see Apple releasing new models on like a yearly basis, for example. Lenovo, have different generation iterations on a kind of yearly, but then sometimes they might do it every 6 monthly basis. So finding out typical trends for how often that hardware vendor produces new models is also really worth doing when looking at onboarding and adding something in to your hardware convention. And finally, is there actually an existing model that you can increase the specification for that will meet the requirements of this net new request for hardware? All of the onboarding relates to some models that is net new to the organization that you don't have already in your hardware approved hardware convention, you don't have in your hardware catalog, that is brand new to your organization. And this not only relates to end user devices, but can also relate to network infrastructure, storage, whatever it may be as well. The next step when you're looking at testing is making sure that you get some test machines for this new model. One for IT, I typically like to provide the IT teams with one so they can do their technical testing, and then another one for the more heavy user, kind of like fits the profile of someone that might actually use this asset within their daily BAU life. Have regular check-ins when doing the testing. Is it working well? If it is, what is working well? What isn't working so well? You can kind of build up a bit of a matrix when you're doing this testing, going through like a checklist of end user based stuff. So you go, yep, that worked well. The keyboard size was good. It was easy to type. Screen resolution looked really nice. It was quick. It was easy to configure, easy to image, etc., etc. And then you can build up that matrix to understand whether that device is right for you and right for your organization. You then all come together at the end of the testing phase with the testers, with the security, with the budget owners, and then you can make that informed decision as to whether this hardware model is actually right for you. Next up is the dreaded budget word. So how does the new hardware model impact on your budget? It may be the case that it's actually cheaper than your existing hardware convention, or that it's more expensive. Either way, you need to do that cost analysis and that cost impact that it's going to have on your budget for that year and future years. And even you could look into the long distance as well on if this was a new model that was going to replace a new standard, how much would that actually cost to then go and do like a hardware refresh, for example, to refresh all of a legacy model with the new model in place. How often do you see price rises? That's really important at the moment. In particular, there's a lot of price rises going on, unfortunately, within the hardware space due to inflation, cost of materials, etc. Are components easily sourced? What you don't want is to move to a new model and then the hardware vendor say, it's actually really hard getting the graphics card, so it's going to take an extra 6-8 weeks for us to deliver this stuff to you. That's just a nightmare. You're trying to onboard a new hardware model. You're trying to show that it's the right choice for the organization. And then the vendor goes and says they've got delays in production or manufacturing. And yeah, checking out the supply chain. Is anyone else in your network or anyone else in the organization finding that these assets are actually taking age to be delivered? Get that information so that you can build that in when you're building your onboarding process. And finally, life cycle management. Does the new model comply with your existing hardware asset management processes? Can you actually map the internal life cycle dates within your asset management database? So would it fit the normal 3 years of life cycle within your organization? If so, make sure that if you're going to onboard this model that you map that within your AMDB. Can you also gather the external date, such as end of warranty, end of support, end of sale, etc., from the hardware vendor? These may not be known if it's a brand new model. It may have just been released by the hardware vendor themselves. So it might not actually be data that they can provide you, but at least ask the question, because if you don't ask, you won't get. And finally, make sure the new model is correctly imported, mapped, whatever your process is within your AMDB. Make sure you've got the right level of category, that it's computer, laptop, however you've defined it, but make sure it follows that standard. There's nothing worse than adding in onboarding a new hardware model into your asset management database and it not be configured correctly so that it goes all out of sync when you're doing your reports and your life cycle analysis. So next up we have, would you procure if you saw me procuring? Oh yeah, Enrique and Ham. Who would have thought? Who would have thought there'd be that relationship or those similarities between Enrique Iglesias and hardware asset management? So the way that Ham can be your hero when it comes to the procure element of the life cycle phase is making sure that you're staying within budget. That's really important, especially, you don't want to go to your CTO, your CIO, your director, VP, whatever, saying that you've got to go over budget on hardware. There are ways in which you can give yourself more of a hardware budget, and we'll go into that in a later slide. But there's some things you can do to make sure you stay in budget, or that you actually increase your budget. Also, Ham can be a hero when it comes to procurement lead times against demand. So if you're looking to buy your hardware in bulk, how long is that going to take? If you're looking for single or 10s or 20s, how long is that going to take? Can you actually meet the demand through the lead times, or are you going to be too late? Are you going to be too early? Being strategic about when you order your hardware so that you reduce the amount of technical debt that you might have when you're doing the procurement and within your organization. Kind of similar to the lead times, but checking the supply chain challenges. Can you actually get that model? If not, can you be a bit agile and maybe get a different, very similar model in place? Again, that's something to consider when you're going through the procurement element of the hardware lifecycle stage. I also like to do a bit of a tender on the resellers or the vendors that we're going through. If we've already got the approved hardware convention and we know we're definitely going to have a particular model, if we can transact through them, amazing. But if not, looking at the resellers, who's out there, how quickly they can get kit to us. Do they store kit locally themselves and then they pass on to us? What's their kind of support structure like? What's their pricing like? So I always do a bit of a tender when we're looking to buy our hardware for the next year to make sure that the client has the best partner for them at the most cost effective pricing as well. When doing the procurement, we're also looking at any additional hardware support that may be of use to us. For example, batteries seem to be one of the things that just give up on laptops, as one of the first things. So can we actually buy additional battery support so that we can just switch the battery out and extend the lifespan of the laptop that we're procuring? May not actually break the bank in terms of cost, but may give you just so much extra value of that asset and maybe even allow you to extend the life cycle to buy an extra year or 6 months. And finally, Ham could be a real hero in making sure that invoices are paid on time. Make sure you have a hardware goods received process that you or your technical support teams, your end user teams, your infrastructure teams, whoever's receiving the equipment or placing the order, make sure that process is in place so they can confirm that they've received exactly what they ordered. The spec is right, the quantity is right, the model is right, nothing's dead on arrival, nothing's broken, etc. So that once you confirm that you've received what you ordered, you can receive the order within your procurement tool, and that then releases payment to the hardware vendor. There is nothing worse than having your account blocked by a hardware vendor because the invoice hasn't been paid on time because you've not had confirmation that you've received the equipment. So Ham can be a massive hero and also improve the relationship with your procurement teams and hardware vendors, resellers, by making sure you have like a hardware goods received process in place so that you can make sure that you pay your hardware vendors on time. Very important. You wouldn't like it if your salary was paid late. So make sure that you have that kind of process and control in place. I could not find a good lyric that goes with the word receive. It just all sounded very unprofessional and inappropriate. So does not go well with any lyrics. So we'll just have the receive element. We mentioned about the hardware goods receive process in procurement, but it kind of rolls nicely into the actual overall receive part of the life cycle as well. We've already mentioned about checking it's not broken, it's not dead on arrival, correct quantity specifications, etc., etc., because that supports the procurement element of the life cycle. You see, it's all linked, it's all intertwined, all logical, all makes sense. If you're using a managed service to do your imaging, your asset tagging, your deployment, etc., has the asset been imaged and tagged correctly? Sounds like a really obvious thing, but the amount of times I've gone into a client and the image hasn't been imaged correctly for that particular user, they've not got the software that they need, they've not got the access that they need on there, it's not been asset tagged correctly, etc. And whilst that's also part of the deployment process, if you have got a managed service, you're receiving that equipment in after they've done that bit of the service. So make sure that all of that has been done correctly, and make sure they've asset tagged it in using the right asset tags on the right location on the device as well. Don't have a free for all of just putting asset tags wherever they think they should put it. Please make sure that you standardize where you're putting your asset tags on your hardware assets. When you receive the goods, you should make sure that they're already in the AIMDb. Do this one of two ways. Either you can actually add it in the procurement element of it. So when you receive notification that your assets have been dispatched, you should be requesting a serial number. You can put it into the AIMDb that these are the assets that we're expecting. This is the make, model, PO, order date, cost, and that it's in transit. And you could even say that it's in transit to this particular office. Or you can do it when you receive the assets. Once you receive them in, make sure you're adding all the serial numbers in, etc. So that then when they hit the network, they hit your inventory tools, it'll auto populate all of the hardware information that you're missing, because you're just ultimately adding in the shell of the asset in there. We've already mentioned about the procurement goods received so that people get paid on time. Yep, you see, it all makes sense. And finally, the receive also flows really nicely into stock management and the deployment element of it. So you may not actually need to provision the hardware that you've just purchased straight away, which is absolutely fine. I really hope you're not sitting on too much stock locally because of technical debt. The warranty will have been activated. There's so many things to consider with that one. But of course, you're going to need to have a few laptops, phones, tablets, servers, etc. on site in the event of an emergency, in the event that you need to loan one out, etc. So yeah, receive flows nicely into stock management, and then that may also flow into deploy. If you're, as soon as you're receiving the goods, you're straight away putting it into service with an end user or within your infrastructure or network teams, for example. So would you deploy and never look back? Ham can be a real hero in this area. I'm sure you see a lot of pictures and stuff on Instagram when someone joins the organization. They've got their brand new laptop. It looks pristine. It's asset tagged. It's got all the access that they need. It's got all the ITAM policies, the IT security policies, all there digitally for them to read and sign, etc. They've got their phone. They've got their iPad. They've got a keyboard, a mouse, all the peripherals, a hoodie, a water mug. You've seen them. You know what I'm on about. So Ham can really help ensure that we meet the internal SLAs for hardware requests and deployment, not only for new starters, but for break, fix, and general deployments as well. This goes back to stock management, the procurement, the receiving. Make sure you're doing all of that in time. And then when you are ready to deploy it, that you do it in a timely and effective manner, and that it's a pleasant experience for your end users. Because remember, your end users are ultimately customers of ITAM. So if they don't have a great experience when they're receiving their equipment and you're deploying it, they'll remember that. And they'll, likelihood is they might talk to their colleagues or other team members, and before you know it, ITAM's got an unfair reputation for being slow or not being able to provide hardware or the right hardware. Always use existing stock first before purchasing new assets. Look at what stock you've got locally in other sites as well. Look at what stock you might have at a third party. Use that first before you buy new stuff and deploy new stuff. And also oldest first. So if you've had something come in to stock a month ago and then you had something come into stock yesterday, make sure you use that one that you received a month ago first, so that you can get the older stuff out there first, and then eventually it will fall into the natural life cycle of a hardware refresh. Ensure the user gets the right model for their requirements as well. Within your hardware convention, you may have multiple different models, like power user, a super user, someone that's really heavily using CAD, for example, or a VP, they need a Surface Pro, for example, or a MacBook Air 13-inch when everyone else gets a MacBook Pro, whatever the case may be, making sure that the user, when they request it, that they are then delivered the right hardware model that meets their requirements, meets their job roles, that meets the specification that they need as well. Sounds simple, Sounds easy, but you wouldn't believe how many people don't do this. So it's just a nice little win to make sure that the person doesn't even need to moan or shout and say it's not the right one, that you nail it from the whole deploy phase. And finally, when deploying, please make sure that when you are giving out equipment that you're updating the AMDB. This is the asset management database to say that it was in stock or was in transit, is now in use. It's the right substate as well. The right user has been assigned to it. The right location has been added to it. And also the overall ownership as well once the asset's deployed. Typically on ownership, I would assign that to ITAM as we're responsible for the lifecycle management. But within your organization, you might do recharging, and therefore the actual ownership you might give to the marketing team or finance or infrastructure, whatever it may be, who are listed as the owners in the AMDB. They're the point of contact you can go to for lifecycle advice or for any challenges. So update the owner, and finally make sure that you give the users that positive experience. We said that, making sure it's the right hardware model, meeting the SLAs, using existing stock that's not battered, that doesn't have loads of stickers over it, using that first, and making sure they're getting a really positive experience when you're deploying hardware to them. And would you maintain my assets tonight? Because Ham can be your hero, baby. Oh dear, I've really excelled myself on the cheese with this one. I'm so sorry. Stick with me, I promise. Hopefully the content's good. So when we're talking about maintenance here, we're looking at the warranties, support agreements, fixing, repairs, and also there's some cheat sheets, which we'll discuss in a second. So warranties, there are a couple of different options here that you need to be aware of and you need to maintain within your AMDB as well. There's a typical standard warranty that you get when you purchase hardware equipment. We've also got extended warranty if you want that bit extra, or a longer warranty period, or greater scope, whatever it may be. There's also the warranty covered type and the scope by vendor and by asset type. The warranty for a laptop is different to the warranty for a switch or a router or a server. So make sure that you're aware of what's actually covered within the warranty scope. And then also, if you look at the standard warranty, you look at the scope, you can be a hero and identify that's absolutely fine, or no, we need to add a bit more in, therefore we need extended warranty, or even an extended support agreement. And also look at anything that covers screens or batteries. They are the ones that typically cause the most pain, and they are the ones that I would absolutely make sure that you're identifying as whether you need that extended warranty, you need additional support to cover your screens and your batteries for your end user and your mobile devices. Looking at hardware support agreements, these are additions to warranties. You might want premium 24/7 support if you're a global organization or you have people that work funny hours. You would also potentially want on-site support so you don't have to ship stuff out and then get it repaired and then ship it back. Accidental damages, additional battery replacement agreements. You've got things like Apple Care out there, Dell service contract agreements, global support agreements. The world is your oyster. If you want that little bit extra on your hardware support agreements, there are so many options out there. You just need to validate and verify if the cost of those additional support agreements are worth it to you. Apple Care, for example, can end up being quite expensive, but you may have a huge Apple estate and it may end up being really cost effective for you over the period of that asset's life cycle. When we talk about maintenance, we're also looking at break fix, so making sure we've got a clear process and definition on what can be internally repaired versus externally repaired. During the warranty phase, I wouldn't let internal repairs happen because you might do something to void the warranty, and you don't want that. You don't want to void the warranty of something that's still got 2 years left of warranty left on it, for example. Also, have a look at the teams responsible for internal repairs. I highly recommend a strict process and RACI around that, because internal repairs can actually end up being quite damaging. You could injure yourself, you could injure others. So making sure they've got the right level of training, the right level of certification, the right level of, the right level of technical knowledge really to do internal repairs. Make sure that happens. If not, make sure that they're trained if you're expecting them to do internal repairs. And I'd also say that this should only be done for stuff outside of warranty, like I said. And finally, it's always useful to have a HR or legal disclaimer if repairs aren't successful. If anyone injures themselves or the end user injures themselves or something that's been repaired by one of your tech staff within your company, it can get a little bit messy. So make sure that you have some sort of disclaimer in place, something to cover your backs anyway, in the event that something goes wrong when you're repairing something. Looking at repairs, we're looking at the cost of repairs via third parties. Typically, if that's 80% or more of the remaining depreciated value, we don't worry about it. We'd rather ITAD it, get some money back through resale, and then buy a new one, especially if it's end of life as well. It's only got a few more months left on its life, or it's completely gone from a hardware life cycle. Then get rid of it, ITAD it, buy a new one. It's just not worth replacing it. It's not economically viable. And the same, again, make an educated decision on whether the repairs are worth it to the business. It may be that the repair costs are actually really expensive, but it's a unique asset. So yeah, it may be expensive, but actually, you know what, it's really worth us repairing this because it supports a particular function or a particular access or a particular process within the organization. Also look at how long it takes to repair for certain things via third parties or even internally. Again, if it's taking too much time to repair something that's towards the end of its life, is it worth it? Again, you've got to make that decision, but probably not, to be honest with you. And also then the logistics, if there's no on-site support, how are you going to package the broken device? How are you going to send it to your third party? Are you expecting them to then confirm receipt? You know, who's going to pay for the postage? Just things like that. Ham can be a real hero by setting that parameter, setting that process, and setting that governance framework. Finally, something that I found really useful are cheat sheets. So what's included in our warranties and support agreements? Simple yes/no matrix for your tech support, your end user support, or even your infrastructure support. They can see, okay, this is a switch. This is with Cisco. We have this kind of warranty. They go, okay, is it this thing that's broken? Yes. Oh, covered under warranty. It's this part of the asset that's broken. Oh, no, not covered under warranty. Therefore, here's the process on how I need to go and get it fixed. Really easy, really valuable as well to reduce the time it takes people to keep messaging you as well on what's covered under warranty, what we supported for, etc. Building this kind of cheat sheet, this matrix is really useful, takes time off of you and allows your teams to be far more proactive in those repairs. And of course, with anything to do with maintenance, repairs, whatever it may be, make sure you've got clearly defined processes, work instructions, and rating matrix so that everyone involved in the maintenance of your assets within your organization is aware of what is expected of them and within what timeframes. Would you tremble if we replaced your assets? Ah, dear. Okay. So typically for your end user based assets, so we're talking about your laptops, your phones, your tablets, it's typically a 3-year internal life cycle rule. Although for phones, you could almost argue that should be reduced to 2 years, as that's what the typical contract lengths are. So that's, again, a decision that you can make internally for your organization. But yeah, standard, I'd go for between 3 or 2 years for phones, and 3 years for your laptops and your tablets. Monitors are a bit longer. We typically go for 5 years on the monitors. Again, if they break, if there's any pixel damage or screen burn or whatever the case may be, you can refresh them sooner than that. Servers, 5 to 7 years, and same for network and infrastructure assets. They've got a much longer lifespan in that case. Some of the smaller network equipment maybe could be down to 3 years. This is typically because it normally gets damaged. It's like Meraki units can get damaged quite easily. Wi-Fi routers and stuff like that. If you're moving them around, if you're physically touching them, they can get damaged. So it's probably better to replace them. But yeah, again, this is just typical kind of industry standards that we're looking at here is in the infrastructure and network stuff is that 5 to 7 year gap. The life cycle rules as well can be defined by the vendor end of warranty, the end of support, end of extended support, end of sale, and end of life as well. It's a big risk running hardware that's end of support and end of life, because then it's basically down to you to try and maintain and fix, which is always a fun challenge, especially with infrastructure and network assets. Less so with the end user based stuff, because you can, if it's out of warranty, you can try and fix and maintain it yourself through the maintain part of the process. But yeah, for infrastructure stuff, I don't like running end of life, end of support hardware equipment. And typically, if you follow the 3-year life cycle span for laptops and end user stuff, you're going to have refreshed it anyway, so that you're in the vendor's life cycle frames anyway. So yeah, that's always nice to define that internally to match and align to what the hardware vendor themselves are saying. Also, we build hardware refresh plans every year. First of all, we are targeting at the overdue assets for refresh. So ones that actually went end of life last year or the year before. Can we get those done as a top priority? Next, we look at the target numbers for the following financial year. So what ones we're expecting to refresh because they're reaching the end of their internal life, or they're reaching the end of the vendor's life if you've kind of sweat the asset and used it even longer than the 3-5 years that we've defined as. When building your hardware refresh plan, it's important to look at the different locations, the sites that you're going to be refreshing these users from. Does your local teams have the resources to be able to do such a hardware refresh? In some cases, you might be talking about thousands of laptops. This typically becomes a big challenge if you've already aligned your hardware refresh plan in the past. So suddenly you've gone from, staggered every year kind of refresh because you've not had a plan, implement a plan. Then in 3 years after you've implemented that plan, you've got a huge amount of laptops, desktops, phones, servers, etc. that will need a refresh because you're following that hardware lifecycle pattern. So make sure you've got existing resources that can actually do that, and then kind of try and stagger out your refresh plan over the year so that if it comes end of life in January, you replace that one first, and then December naturally would be last, and do all the ones in between. So you're not overloading your local teams. The equipment that you're then receiving back from that hardware refresh, send it off to your third-party company, get that ITADed. Either get it recycled, destroyed, or even better, resold so that you get some residual value back and the asset gives you even more value at the end of its life. What we then typically like to do is build a matrix for the next 5-7 years. So once we've got all of our hardware life cycles defined, we know when the asset was purchased, we know how long it's been in circulation within the organization, we can clearly identify when it's due for a hardware refresh. We build out that refresh plan for next year, the year after, etc., with expected costs as well as to how much it's going to cost to replace it. This then helps when you're talking to finance, procurement, your VPs, your CIO, etc., because you can build out that expected hardware spend for a long time in advance, which again is just hugely valuable to not only yourself but all of your key stakeholders as well. And it also allows you to let stakeholders that pay for some hardware know what you're expecting them to budget for and to pay for in the coming years, because not everything is going to end up in the ITAM budget. I'd be very surprised if everything was in your budget, but typically you have infrastructure pay for infrastructure stuff, network pay for network stuff, ITAM or your end user teams pay for end user stuff. It's quite rare that one cost center pays for all hardware, but if it happens, then at least you can let your financial controllers know, you can let your stakeholders know and your C-level know what the expected spend is going to be to replace your end of life and legacy hardware for years and years to come, which just makes ITAM and HAM look just incredibly proactive and really, really good. Every time we've done this, it's gone down really well because it's visibility and data that they may not have had previously. And no one likes a surprise when it comes to spending money. The other thing that I would also consider when doing the replace in terms of hardware refresh is factor in those expected price rises as well. Also look at any potential model or manufacturer switches that are on the horizon and factor that in when you're building your refresh plan. Kind of give some scenarios that if we stuck with this model, it would cost this much to replace. If we move to a better spec, it would cost this much, a lesser spec. You get the idea. So building up those kind of scenarios, if you are aware of any changes that are potentially on the horizon, there may not be anything. You might be perfectly happy with the hardware vendor you've got already. Then the scenario mapping isn't required. But if you are aware of potential changes, scenario map your hardware refresh plans for the next few years will give your decision makers even more data to make a good and informed decision on. We moving on to some of the latter stages of the life cycle now, and which is retrieve. Now, would you retrieve for the ITAM you love? Hopefully, yes, you will. And there's a couple of ways in which that we can retrieve hardware assets, very similar to the way that we do software audits. First of all, are those internal hardware audits. So here we're looking at users with multiple assets of the same type. So you've got 2 laptops, Why? You've got a laptop and a desktop. Do you really need both? Probably not. Got 2 phones. You get the idea. So auditing those people, making sure that we are then optimizing what they have got, reclaiming what they don't need so that we can put that back into circulation, or we can put that into stock or put that into ITAD, whatever's appropriate for that asset. Also looking then at assigned assets that haven't been used for 30 days, chasing them. Why is it not being used? Can we bring it back into IT and reuse it? Very similar with software that we do. Users that have assets that are outside of the existing hardware model convention, why have you got something that's outside of our convention? It hopefully would be legacy before you implemented a convention, but if it's not, why have you gone rogue? Why have you brought something we haven't approved? It's a great way to do an audit on that one as well. Wrongly provisioned mobile devices. We see this a lot where only VPs are allowed a certain iPhone, or we see only certain level of people are allowed an iPad, etc., whatever the case may be. So doing these kind of audits identifies people that has equipment that they shouldn't have, and also the internal audit supports the refresh. Again, see how they all match up. So when you're doing some of your reclaiming through your hardware audits, you might actually receive kit back that you can then re-provision as part of the hardware refresh plan. Therefore, cost avoiding having to buy loads of new stuff. We're also looking at retrieving assets from leavers, making sure we get all of their provisioned equipment on their last working day. This should be done in person as well. Courier services are just they make me nervous because they can claim they sent it back, give a rubbish tracking number, and we never actually receive the equipment back. So in person's always better. Subsequently, when reclaiming the hardware, you're going to also need to reclaim the software licenses, remove licenses from portals, reclaim license keys, stop subscriptions, whatever the case may be, because you can't do HAM without SAM. There's a very good piece of evidence as to why that's the case. If assets are not returned, this is where you involve HR and line managers to reclaim the asset. This is a tricky one as well, because we typically start to get legal and HR involved for recouping costs if people don't return their equipment and we need to replace it out of final salary, out of final benefits, whatever the case may be, or out of a cost center, so that we are compensated so that we don't go over the budget to buy new hardware. And finally, it allows the lifecycle process to flow into stock management or redeploy, because if you're reclaiming equipment that's still got valid life left in the organization, you can put that into, like I said, the hardware refresh. We can put it into the request and deployment so that you don't have to buy new assets all the time. And all of this equals a lot of rewards. If you're following the internal audits and levers, you're optimizing your hardware, you're controlling local and centralized stock levels, you're managing that tech debt a lot better. You're managing financial control as well. You know what's required for net new purchases against what you can use with existing stock levels. Yeah, we mentioned about technical debt, making sure that assets are being proactively used throughout their life cycle within your organization, and also naturally reducing the number of out-of-life models that are currently in use within your organization, so that you remain within those hardware lifecycle parameters that you defined previously. And I will ITAD end-of-life assets forever. And now I've got the song stuck in my head. So this is the retirement part of the life cycle, and unfortunately where our hardware assets leave and end their journey within ITAM and within the organization. Now, first of all, you can look at the decommissioning process. This is more for your infrastructure and network assets, making sure that they're powered off correctly, de-racked, removed, physically correctly removed and safely removed. Here, we're also looking to make sure that we've backed up any data that was on them. Typically, if they're end of life, they probably aren't consuming too much data. But naturally, we want to make sure that anything that is on there is backed up and has been sorted out correctly. For stuff that we can't resell or that's being recycled, we need data destruction certificates and references, or actual physical destruction references for physically destroying the kit. So we need the data one and the physical kit. And of course, need to make sure that the AMDB has been updated and that we're following that end of life audit trail. Couple of standards to be made aware of that you should be following when you're looking at a retirement and ITAD. That's the WE, so Waste Electrical and Electronic Equipment Mandate, which makes sure that you're following UK and European legislations for harmful chemicals and materials within electronic waste, e-waste. You've got ISO 9001, Quality Management, ISO 14001, Environmental Management, and of course ISO 27001, which is Information Security. Key standards that your organization must be following to ensure that they have their corporate responsibility, their environmental and sustainability responsibilities as well when destroying of e-waste that the organization is responsible for. We've also got some other ones related to the US and other parts of the world, which is the Resource Conservation and Recovery Act of 1976 and the e-waste management and handling rules in 2011. So all things that you need to make sure that when you're retiring, you're disposing, you're ITADing your equipment, that the third party that you're working with and using has all of that certification in place already, so that nothing's going to come back and bite your organization or be something that could have a negative impact, negative PR, negative press, data leakage, etc. That's everything you want to avoid. So make sure that your ITAD providers have those certifications. Hopefully, you'll be able to resell some of your assets at the end of their life. We typically aim for a 70-30 split on the profits with a dedicated ITAD provider. Organizations get 70%. They get 30% for all of their processing and actually doing the sale itself. These profits then go back into the ITAM budget to cover any unwanted spend on software or hardware, or even to improve things like buying an extra module within your ITAM tool or your ITSM tool that will help you manage your hardware or software more effectively. You can actually take further steps with ITAD to make ITAM become a profit center. So, for example, if your hardware budget is number out of the air, $100,000, you've got a small hardware budget and you actually ITAD $130,000 worth of stuff in profit that comes back to you, ITAM starts to become a profit center. But we actually have a whole webinar on ways in which ITAM can become a profit center coming in the future weeks. So I won't say too much on that one for now. You've also got the opportunity to donate assets to local schools or charities. Computers for charity is another, is a big one. Unwanted legacy, end-of-life laptops and end-user stuff mainly. They send it to third world countries so that people in schools have the ability to access computers and electronic equipment, which is a really good charity if you are looking for a charity to donate your kit to. Please make sure you have any legal disclaimers and waivers in place for any assets that you donate. Very important. I heard some horror stories, and actually a vet organization many moons ago before I became consultant, they actually had some issues when they donated assets to charity. The assets, they had some problems with them that caused physical harm to someone that had it on their lap, and they came back to the organization. We had no legal waiver in place, didn't really have a leg to stand on, which was unfortunate. So make sure you have a leg to stand on and you have some legal disclaimers for any assets that you're donating. And of course, when you're disposing equipment, make sure you get all those disposal certificates, data destruction references, so that you can add them to the asset in the AIMDB, so that you've got that audit trail and that you've nailed your end of life part of the process. Also, this is really useful in the event of any internal or external audits as well, having this data disposal reference or this destruction certificate to show that you are following your corporate responsibility, your sustainability, your environmental standards, etc., and that you are really taking care of the end of life of your hardware assets. And with that, that is all of the different stages within the hardware asset life cycle. So there's only one thing left to say. Like Enrique Iglesias says, ham can be your hero, baby. I really hope you found this useful. This is a very high level overview. Like I said, this was presented at Wisdom a few weeks ago, and we only had like a half an hour slot. So I hope you found it useful. If you've got any questions or feedback, please let me know down in the comments or drop me a message on LinkedIn or an email. Thank you so much for watching this video. It's very much appreciated. Please don't forget to like and subscribe if you found it useful or if you want more ITAM related content. And until next time, happy ITAMing.